he loaded up the crack pipe with with the bufo, held it up to my lips, and instructed me to take a slow and deep breath as much as I could. Um, I held my breath at the top, and before I could even exhale, I had entered another dimension.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Trip Sitting Podcast, where we explore what it means to be human. On this week's episode, we have Henry Winslow, who is the man and creator of Tricycle Day, which is truly my personal favorite way to actually get all of my news surrounding the psychedelic industry. So it was truly amazing to have him on and discuss his journey with psychedelics, his journey with Tricycle Day, some of the things that he's most excited about that are coming up within the industry this year. And it was just a great episode where we were able to go deep and just really feel into each other's energies and just tap in and be there in the present moment. So thanks everybody for coming here. And before we start, I just want to say that this episode is sponsored by Conscious Retreats. Conscious Retreats is a service that helps you find the best plant medicine retreat center for your plant medicine journey, whether that is ayahuasca, psilocybin, or iboga. We've got a network of retreat centers that we know are safe, we know are trusted, they've been vetted, and we're just going to be a sounding board to help you make that decision and, you know, just be a part of your journey, and it's completely free. So if you're interested, go to consciousretreats.net. Now, here is Henry. So we first recorded an episode, I want to say like close to a year ago at this. Maybe it was in like March or April of last year. I don't even remember.
It's probably at least 6 months ago.
Yeah, 100%. I know it was before psychedelic science for sure.
Yes.
And there was just something that was messed up with the recording. So like we recorded it, and then at the end of it, I looked at it again, and like 2 minutes had recorded, and then it just stopped recording at 2 minutes. And I was like, we'll figure this out later. But what I do remember is when we recorded, it was right when Tricycle Day hit 5,000.
Is that right?
Like I specifically remember that because I remember talking about that, and you went from like 1,500 to 5,000 like super quick, and I remember being like, oh my god, dude, that's amazing. And that was when I just discovered Tricycle Day. But now you're at what, over 36,000?
Yeah. Oh, you've kept up with the numbers.
Oh, dude, I mean I read it every week, so I'm
reading everything say it in there. Right, so where I call for sponsors, it says exactly how many we're at.
So I guess for those that don't know, do you want to explain what Tricycle Day is?
Yeah. Tricycle Day is a free twice-a-week newsletter that I write. It covers the most important news in psychedelic research, policy, and business. There's also a series of interviews that I do as part of that, which is a little bit more on like the cultural and perspective side of things. But I think what separates Tricycle Day from other media platforms out there is that there's a very unique tone of voice to it, which is a little bit irreverent. I try to strike the right balance between snarkiness and respect that I think these medicines deserve. But my intention behind all of that really is to speak to, you know, like the large portion underneath the bell curve of people who might be interested in psychedelic information and education, because we're at this point in time when more and more people are becoming interested.
Yeah. For me, you're honestly the only publication that I truly consistently read. And I'm not just trying to gas you up right now. And it's because it's genuinely just like so easy to read. Like I don't have time to go through the amount of information that I imagine you go through on a weekly basis.
Yeah, totally. And I hear that often. When I first started, I thought that it was going to be, you know, I'm speaking to novices, for lack of a better word, like people who are newer to the space. And what I found over a year of writing it is that actually it's a lot of people. I mean, yes, those people are interested, but a group of people that I did not expect to gravitate to the newsletter are reading it too. And that's people who are working in the space. And I think that just goes to show that everybody's looking for a level of entertainment too. Like, yes, you could probably get deeper coverage elsewhere, but it should be fun, it should be fun to consume the content.
Yeah. Your meme game is also on fleek.
Thank you.
Do you create all of your own memes?
Yeah, I do. I mean, part of what makes a meme is that you are building off of something that exists in the zeitgeist. So, I can't take credit for all the images and everything, but yes, I'm the one who creates all the Tricycle Day content.
Did you create memes for like anything else before you started Tricycle Day, or was this the first time that you're like, I'm just gonna start making memes about psychedelics?
Yeah, it is the first time I've ever made memes. Certainly like at this scale and like this consistency is the first time I've ever done. I had probably made memes here and there, but never as part of a content strategy for a brand I worked on, in like my agency life or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. So I want to stop talking about Tricycle Day for a bit and go back to sooner and talk more about how psychedelics entered your life. Also, I remember I gave you a little bit of shit last time just because you went to Harvard, nerd. But so how does one end up, being a Harvard graduate, being your own successful entrepreneur beforehand, and then getting into like the psychedelics world? Like, what happens?
Yeah. It's funny that you asked me that, because I think you asked me a version of that question in our dry run a few months ago. And I actually have a lot more clarity around that now than I did then. Just due to some reflection, probably some integration of psychedelic experiences of my own. But I think that the real source of that is like with many things, formative experiences in my childhood. I grew up in a family where, I'm going to be careful about this because, I always want to be respectful of my parents and like my family and honor the privilege that I did have. Like, my parents took good care of me and all of that, but there were some serious mental health challenges in my family growing up. It's like very clear to me now that it was intergenerational kind of stuff. Having learned more about the struggles that my parents went through themselves and how that was kind of carried forward as a pattern and perpetuated. So basically, I saw how difficult struggling with mental health in ways that are like difficult to describe and understand as a child could impact my feeling of safety as a child, quality of life generally, and also just like this idea of, the interaction between mental wellness and a sense of feeling loved. And I didn't have the structure or language or framework to really understand that as a child. I just knew that, this situation is difficult that I'm going through. I remember there were some very specific memories around my mom having basically depressive episodes that turned into breaks, tantrums, like destroying stuff in the house. And, I think now I'm also a new parent, so I have a different frame to look through all of this at. And one thing I've learned since becoming a parent, or heard from different people and read in books, is like it's super important to present a united front as two parents, like to the kids, right? Mm-hmm. And there was a moment where my mom was like really going off, and my dad had to break that united front. And he said to me, like pulled me aside, and he's like, I'm looking out for you and the kids. Like, we might have to pick up and go. And that was a really scary time. Like I said, I didn't really know why at the time, but now I kind of understand better. And I say all of this because, it kind of transferred on to other members of my generation of the family, my siblings. There have been suicide attempts. There have been suicide threats, a lot of pervasive, long-lasting mental health challenges, eating disorders, all of that. And fortunately, I've been able to insulate myself from that to some degree. Like, certainly I've never had anything clinically significant. We all have our mental health struggles, right? So I don't want to say that I got out scot-free or anything like that, but it took me to the place where I have always had a fascination and sort of a sense of purpose around understanding why this happens, And I think I was also in a family that like really valued independence, or taught me that independence was important. I was the youngest of 5 kids, so I kind of like, my parents are like, we've already raised a bunch of kids. You can kind of go figure this out yourself. So I learned resourcefulness and independence from an early age. And I also kind of learned that I needed to prove myself, whether or not that was true. So I think that really drove the type A personality, like, the goal-oriented kind of nature of my childhood. Yeah, overachiever, went to Harvard and all of that. But after Harvard, I went into the workforce. I was like working at an ad agency, specifically working with healthcare companies, pharmaceutical companies. And it was when I got into yoga that I felt like, okay, now I actually am connected to something that matters. And it was a little bit, there was some tension there because it was not on the straight and narrow path of the overachiever. It's like taking a step back in that sense, because yoga teaching is not like rewarded from a capitalist perspective as much as working in corporate. But I decided to go all in on that because I realized that it was actually helping people, and it had helped me quite a lot.
Yeah. What made you get into yoga to begin with? Like, was it just a random happenstance thing, or like, did you get into it like with intention of stepping back and slowing down?
No, it was not with that intention. That was an after effect that I had not anticipated. I got into it because I wanted to, I'd always I'd been a springboard diver. I loved acrobatic kind of stuff. And I went to New York to, do my first job, and there were yoga studios around. A friend of mine brought me there, and he was like, you're going to love this because you can do handstands and learn tricks. And I even brought that like ambitious kind of like type A personality to yoga. I was chasing the postures, which served me, in a lot of ways, because it gave me a structure through which I could get those unintended positive consequences.
Mm-hmm. So it all comes full circle. Now, just listening to your story, which we'll definitely keep going into, but, I can relate to that a lot of what you said of, my parents did the absolute best job that they could. And like, I don't like to shit on them or see anything bad. And like, they always made sure I had a roof over my head, and like, I had food, and like, I was never truly worried, but like my innate sense of love, that myself was just lacking a lot, because of some earlier childhood experiences with my dad, especially. Used to just be a very, very like reactive, angry individual where he could just go off on a moment's notice. And so those experiences, again, it's all subconsciously, but made me realize that I kind of always had to be on my toes, just because I never knew what it would be that might set him off. And then anytime you would get angry, when you're a kid, you take all that personally. And I think that, it's something I did that made that happen. I can now obviously look back and see, no, this is all intergenerational trauma that he received from his own parents, from his own upbringing, and just hasn't dealt with himself. It's nothing to do with me. It's all to do with him and the way that he handles things, the way that he was taught to do things too. But, as a child, we don't, again, have the necessary framework and the peace of mind to be able to put any of that together.
Not only that, but also as a child, like your brain is still so plastic that every single impression like that makes a lasting difference.
Yeah. And it's interesting to you talk about the United Front. So my parents got divorced, I think around the time I was 2.5, something like that. And so I don't have any memories of them when they were together. But they were also, it was not a good divorce. Like we'll say that they were fighting constantly, pretty much up until the time that my brother graduated high school, which was 2 years before I graduated high school. So about the time that I was 16 years old. And then it was more just the fact that I was so hyper independent. Like that was my coping mechanism, was becoming so hyper independent, where I'm like, listen, I don't need you guys. I can handle it all on my own, and I can, do the best job that I could, which admittedly, could have been better. but part of being an adult, I think, is being able to reflect on those times and see your parents for who they are, for like the damaged humans that like all of us are, that have gone through some shit and are just trying our best.
Yeah, it becomes a lot easier to do that when you become closer in age to what the age that they were when you were a child.
Yeah,
Like
I
when
guess.
you're a kid, you think of an adult as being like a fundamentally different thing.
Hmm.
But at this point, you've aged gradually, and it's like you're still the same person. All these little incremental changes, you realize like, oh yeah, like they were actually a child, just
Uh-huh.
stepping into parenthood for the first time too, or in my case, the fifth time. But still, you're still learning something new constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely interesting to look back, and also now at this age, it's interesting to look back and see children. Like I have two younger brothers that are 16 or that are 17 now, 17 and 14, and just now thinking about, damn, what was I like at that age, and how much I've learned in the 10 years between 17 and now I'm about to be 27. Is just crazy to think of how much growth truly happens then, and how much more growth even happened before that. Again, as you said, children are so plastic with the way that they think, that the tiniest little experiences can truly affect you subconsciously for so long, which is what my first psychedelic experiences just made me, I think, innately realize, was that I am programmed to think a certain way up until this point, but I can change the programming.
Right, right. And like to your point, as a child, like you're constantly changing the programming.
Yeah, you're
In
just
that
not
way,
as aware of it.
psychedelics kind of give you a chance to rewind the clock, not necessarily to lose those experiences, but to go back into that state.
Yeah, I think go back and like appreciate the experiences for what they were. Like understand that, I firmly believe that everything that happened exactly the way that it was supposed to happen in order for us to get right here. Like nothing else makes sense to me. So even all of those, quote unquote bad experiences as a child that, maybe fucked us up a little bit and gave us a little bit of trauma, like we had to get through that. Like nobody escapes childhood without any trauma whatsoever.
Yeah.
You see the poorest of the poor and the richest of the rich. It affects every single person that there is. And so being able to have the mind of an adult now to then look at those experiences and see, okay, like it simply just was an experience. I don't necessarily need to judge it as this bad thing that I need to be afraid of for the rest of my life. I can just see it for what it is, a bad experience, and just move on.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the case for folks like us. I mean, I don't know that much about you, but based on where you are in life and like the fact that you're doing a podcast and we're having this conversation, I can sense that probably the trauma that you went through was not life-threatening.
Yeah.
And not like permanently damaging, but for like the sort of trauma that like you said is inescapable for every person on earth. I like to think of it as these are experiences that turn us into who we are and imbue us with strengths that differentiate us.
Yeah. So I'm curious, when was your first psychedelic experience?
It was actually pretty late in life. I must have been probably 28.
Okay. And
Yeah.
how old are you now?
34.
Okay, got it. So about 6 years ago. So that's probably the same time, same time frame as me. I'm just a little younger.
Yeah.
And then what was it? What was the substance? Was it intentional? What did you do? Tell me everything.
It was a pretty mild dose of psilocybin mushrooms. Just crunched up the dried mushrooms themselves, not like, folded into any sort of recipe or blended into capsules or anything like that. It was intentional in a sense and also not intentional in a sense. It was intentional in that I wanted to have a more spiritual experience. I was taking them while in nature. I'd like gone up to Woodstock, New York, outside of New York City, with some friends, and was getting ready to do a yoga practice. And my friend slash teacher said, here, we can take these and like you'll be able to tap into a different energy with the postures. And so that was a cool idea to me, and had like been interested in psychedelics, but just not had the opportunity surface. So I took them, and it did affect the practice in a way. But you know, what's interesting is for me, I was like so deep in my yoga practice that I was already having somewhat mystical experiences in practice with some regularity. I mean, especially around like the meditation side, not just the physical asanas. But it was cool. Not anything like life-shattering, like profound that you hear about with, you know, people saying is the top 5, you know, most important experience of their life, like Johns Hopkins style. But it was enough for me to continue being interested. And the next time that I had a psychedelic experience, I had, you know, the one that completely changed. There was a before and an after.
And was that also
experience with
psilocybin
Bufo.
mushrooms? Oh, that was Bufo.
That was the Bufo, yeah.
Okay. So what led up to that?
Yeah, so again, it was in the context of my yoga practice. In yoga, in the philosophy of yoga, for listeners who may be familiar, then this will be boring, but if you don't know this, then a quick lesson. So there's a text, a fundamental text in yoga called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And he talks about the 8-fold path of yoga. And asana is the physical practice. You know, that's what people do in fitness classes. That's just one kind of minor part of the yoga path. So, you know, the ultimate goal that it is a sequential process, and the last 3 steps of the 8 steps are all meditative. It's dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Dharana basically means that you are focused on a singular object or concept. Could be like a flicker of light on a candle. It could be a mantra. It could be a mental image. And then dhyana is cognitive absorption. It's where your mind and that object of focus, essentially like the boundary between them dissolves, and it no longer is you looking at that thing mentally. It's your mind is that thing. And then the final step is samadhi, and it's where that merging actually extends beyond the duality of the self and the other. And I mean, this is going to sound familiar to anyone who's had like a psychedelic experience.
It already sounds pretty trippy, let me tell you.
Yeah. So basically, samadhi is the escape from the illusion of duality. Mm-hmm. Your sense of self dissolves. Your experience of consciousness becomes unified with all that is. And so I had read about this system, you know, and practiced many of the pieces of it for many years. But the concept of samadhi was something that was very elusive and also very attractive. Mm-hmm. I kind of had resigned myself that I would never experience it directly because, you know, this is like the ultimate goal of a millennia, you know, a practice that had been, you know, studied and perfected over many thousands of years. And at a time when people would, you know, be renunciates. These are not householders going about a daily life like doing a job. You know, they dedicated this soul's like existence to achieving that goal. And you would, you know, disappear off into a cave, deprive yourself of all the senses, and then maybe, you know, after many years of practice, you would achieve samadhi. So it was like, okay, that's just a cool thing to know of the history of yoga, right?
Yeah, it's like in this society, that doesn't sound like it's too achievable.
Yeah, totally. And I was living in New York City. I was like bouncing around teaching like 10 to 20 classes a week. You got to rush around the subway. It was not part of my lifestyle. But then one of my friends who was also a yoga teacher, she told me about a Bufo ceremony. And the way that she really captured my attention with it was she basically framed it as like the instant cheat code to samadhi. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I was very obviously intrigued by that. Didn't do a ton of research into what it was. I just knew it was like a psychedelic substance and that it came from the Sonoran desert toad and you smoked it. But she introduced me to the practitioner who had served her. And he lived in the Upper East Side of Manhattan in a doorman building.
Tight.
I had a phone call with him and he told me like, hey, here's some resources you can look into. Don't do too much research though, because you kind of want to avoid expectations. And he just told me like, some things to avoid going up to it, just to have like a proper dieta, essentially. So I did it. Like a week later, I showed up at his apartment. He took me through a little ceremony. There was a prayer beforehand, and then he loaded up the crack pipe with the bufo, held it up to my lips, and instructed me to take a slow and deep breath as much as I could. I held my breath at the top, and before I could even exhale, I had entered another dimension, a timeless and spaceless existence where I felt what I can only describe as pure and unconditional, all-encompassing love. And it changed me. Yeah, it completely changed me. It was an experience I hesitate to like recommend it to people because I know that it can also be extremely destabilizing. And that's because it is so profound. But it was very positive for me because it changed my outlook on what exists, the fundamental nature of reality is. And it taught me that everything that we are going through on a day-to-day basis is really just scratching the surface of what's going on here. Yeah. And that was a little bit scary and, like, to my point earlier, a bit destabilizing even for me for, maybe a week or so afterward. It was like, how did I go 30 years of my life without knowing this? But ultimately, through integration and contemplation and meditation around it, it turned into something that brought me gratitude and contentment and acceptance of all of the challenges of life.
Damn, that's so beautiful and so profound. I love that. I've never experienced Bufo. It's on my list for sure. But obviously not something I'm trying to rush into at the same time because I know how, destabilizing it theoretically can be, as with any of these medicines, by the way. Psilocybin mushrooms, if you've never experienced them and, you go into a proper guided ceremony at a high dose, it'd be pretty destabilizing too. Ayahuasca,
although the ceremonial container will probably mitigate that risk.
It absolutely does. And I mean, even just having a guide, I think helps mitigate the risk, like a proper, psychedelic guide or medicine guide, can definitely help mitigate some of that. Just because you can go deeper and you have the time and the space to ask the questions and know that you're properly held.
I think there's a lot to be said about just feeling the safety, and because that trust in your environment allows you to surrender, which is, that's the most important thing in my view.
Yeah, I think like absolutely the ability to really be able to surrender, and that I mean my second ayahuasca ceremony, that was what I was just having so much trouble surrendering, and it was all like super subconscious. Because I think my whole life, again, back to the childhood thing, I never really felt super safe to be fully seen for exactly who I was. I was always trying to fit the mold that I thought my parents wanted for me, which wasn't always, 100% authentically me. So I had been hiding from that true authentic self for so long that I didn't even know it. Again, it's all so subconscious. So during that second ceremony, it was just like all this pain building up. And it was the facilitators that would be checking on me and helping me along the way, be like, hey, just lean into it. It's okay. It's safe. And like giving me that reassurance that finally allowed me to truly surrender and then feel honestly a pretty similar sense of just oneness with the everything, of like being able to see me being able to see me for who I truly am, and understanding that I'm not identified by all of the things that happened to me as childhood. Like I don't need to make those a part of my personality, and like they don't have to be these huge important things that I need to hold on to emotionally for the rest of my life. I could just choose to let that energy go. And I'm the one that's choosing to hold it all in, which is making myself suffer.
When you're in the medicine with ayahuasca, and I'm asking this as someone who has never sat with ayahuasca, so I don't have a basis of comparison or direct experience to work with, but are you like in a space mentally where you can actually engage with those thoughts? Like, are you working through that in the medicine?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. That to me, that's like a little bit more like my experience with high dose mushrooms compared to Bufo, with which, you know, you have a few seconds before your mind completely unravels and you're no longer dealing with even like abstractions of concepts.
That's what I've heard about Bufo. Is like, it's so quick and so intense that like you don't have time to even think through any of that.
Yeah, there's not a lot of like conscious level trauma processing or even memory. At least there hasn't been for me. And I've sat with Bufo now 7 times, and that's never been my experience. It's much more of a felt, emotional medicine.
Yeah.
Almost like MDMA in a way. I mean, you also don't have visualizations. I should stop saying you. I have not had visualizations. It has not been like, you know, and I've like smoked DMT. You don't go through these like geometric patterns or anything like that. Yeah, very different.
Yeah. A lot of people also too still, I don't think fully understand the difference between NN DMT and 5-MeO DMT. And so you've also smoked NN DMT.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. What is that one for you compared to Bufo?
Like, and it could be that it was a lower dose also, but for me, like it was a vape pen. Like I vape penned NN DMT, and it took me into like a kind of futuristic, like neon tunnel expansion, like the scene before the movie starts at the movie theater. But definitely not an ego dissolution.
Yeah. For me too. Like I felt like I was going into like a Back to the Future sort of thing, and then it was just kind of cool.
Yeah, it's just like cool, but it wasn't like as meaningful.
Yeah.
Not even close. Like I have to say, you know, about the first Bufo experience, the last thing that my mind was able to speak in like English language before even that unraveled was, you made it. Like nothing else matters. This is the purpose of existing.
Damn. Like I got a similar message from ayahuasca. It just took me a lot longer. And like, honestly, I probably didn't fully feel that until like weeks afterwards. But I mean, I think that's why I love psychedelic medicines so much. Like all of them kind of do get you to the same place. Like they're all there to get us back to like truth of oneness. And it's that realization that we've already done it. There's nothing more that we need to do. And like all these societal expectations on us to get a job and make a bunch of money and do all these things and have these achievements, like all of that is so unbelievably fake. And once you realize that it's fake, then you can really start having fun with it, because you're like, oh wait, it doesn't fucking matter. Like it really doesn't fucking matter.
That's my take too. And it's not like, oh, because this isn't everything that I should opt out. It's like, I'm going to play this game.
Yeah. Now I get to have fun. Now I see it for the game that it is. Like life really is a game. I just wrote about the fact that, I did like a word of the year for 2024. And that was inspired by one of my past guests, Sarah Howitt. And so my word this year is play, specifically because of that right there. Like this is a game. Pretending like it's anything more serious than that, like to me that just creates suffering. Like that already logically is like that sounds silly. Like why would I pretend like it's serious when we can leave and do different things in society? And it's hard to get out of that Western mindset that we have, that we're indoctrinated into. Like our schools teach it to us, our parents teach it to us, that like this is life. Of you go to school, go to school again, maybe go to school a third time, and then get a job so you can make money and get a house and have the kids and like do all these things. Whereas like theoretically, like I could just go move to another country and they live completely differently. That's not to say one's right and one's wrong. There's just so many different ways to live. So for us to think that because we grew up a certain way, this is the way I have to keep doing things. That's just dumb.
Yeah, very true. I still sometimes take things seriously, but it's less.
Oh, I do too, all the time.
Yeah, but not even because like, I mean, yes, certainly I like forget about my lessons from psychedelic experiences and need to be reminded, but that's not what I'm talking about right now. What I mean is that I take things seriously because it's fun to be competitive.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Agreed.
like it's fun to get into it. And I think the real takeaway for me, and maybe it's a rationalization of just something that I wanted to do anyway, but I think of it as like, since it is a game, I can choose the game I want to play. And if I decide I don't like this game anymore, I can switch to another game.
Mm-hmm. And that's also hard to realize too, again, because we then create these identities around us as players in this game. And then we become so attached to that we don't realize that we can actually just stop playing the game and just go play a different one.
Yeah. And there's this like pervasive idea that I see with a lot of people in my life, that if you change your identity, if you reinvent yourself, that you've wasted the time prior to that. And it's like taking a step backward. I completely disagree with that. I think that we have the right and option to start over whenever we want, because yeah, life is short. And like if you continue the analogy, like extend the metaphor of the game, like have you ever played like a role-playing game where you choose your character type? Like you play as like the Amazon and then you're the warrior. Mm-hmm. Like I want to play as all the characters.
Yeah. Hell yeah. I love that analogy. No, that's it. Like we get the opportunity to play as all of these different characters. It's not like, again, like we're stuck into this mode. And if we choose to play as a different character, we just wasted all that time playing as a different one. It's like, no, like I just got to have, yeah, exactly. I just got to have this sweet experience over here as this guy. And now I'm going to go over here and play as this guy and just see what happens.
See what I can do if I build up some spells.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a really, really good analogy. And so, I mean, so since that Bufo experience, like, did you know right up that point that psychedelics were actually going to continue to make a very meaningful impact in your life, and eventually you'd actually be working in this space?
Definitely not. It immediately affected the way that I showed up in teaching my yoga classes, mm-hmm. because it gave me a felt and direct experience of some of these, the esoteric topics. But I had no desire or intention to do anything more with psychedelics, certainly beyond my own personal experiences. Mm-hmm. I thought maybe, I might have more medicine experience and more ceremonies, but was not planning on getting into working in it at all. And again, back then I didn't really have all of the knowledge or frameworks that I'm aware of now around medicine experiences. So I wasn't aware of like integration. Mm-hmm. But intuitively, I think I understood, like, it's probably not smart to like jump into any rash decisions at this point. Like I'm still working through this. I'm still processing some really powerful insights that I just got. So yeah, it wasn't until 3 or 4 years later that I started Tricycle Day. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm curious, have your psychedelic experiences and you being now more open about it and talking about it, has it changed at all in the way that you have conversations with your family, like your parents or your siblings? Like, have they opened up to it?
I was never too secretive about it, mm-hmm. to be honest with you. I never felt like ashamed about it. And I knew, actually, one of the first things like I ever heard about mushrooms was that my dad tried them in college.
Okay.
Yeah. So it definitely wasn't the sort of thing where I felt like it was not a safe topic of conversation with my mm-hmm. parents. And in fact, my dad thinks Tricycle Day is awesome. He sends me news that he comes across. Usually I've already seen it, but he'll ship it my way anyway, which I love. I love that he's like interested and wants to support me in what I'm doing. As far as like siblings, I have brought it up. I'm really careful about making unsolicited suggestions to people. So, one of my siblings is has struggled on and off with pretty serious depression for a long time, basically like since we were kids and to this day. And that sibling's spouse has come to me for advice. Mm-hmm. And I did suggest that she look into it. Mm-hmm. So that's been the one time that I've like recommended it to someone in my family. And even then it was like, hey, just like check this out and see if it's something that you might be interested in exploring.
It's still a pretty hands-off approach.
Yeah. And I think part of that is just because it's so difficult to have it in a controlled environment. Mm-hmm. Like it really depends on, do you know the right person? And like, can you like, have you developed that trust? I think once we get into a situation where these, you know, for all like the potential downsides and risks that could come up around the medicalization of psychedelics, I think that is one thing that is really worth looking forward to, is having a sense of safety and knowing that, you know, therapists or practitioners are held to a certain standard, and, you know, that you're not taking a risk in just working with someone.
Yeah. So I'm curious, I guess now in the last year of you doing Tricycle Day, have there been any like surprising trends or things that have happened or come up that maybe you didn't expect within, I guess, how the psychedelics industry has really started to take off?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's really interesting, and I think we're going to see a lot more like confirmatory data around, confirmatory or whatever the opposite of that is, mm-hmm. Refuting evidence for this year, is this trend of sometimes people call them psychoplastogens, like the non-hallucinogenic but same mechanism of action novel mm-hmm. agents. So basically there are these companies that are trying to take away the subjective experience because it is inconvenient, also more costly because it takes up all this time, and see if you can still maintain the therapeutic benefit. Mm-hmm. And that's like a pretty controversial idea, right? Because for people who have had profound medicine experiences, often they'll say that it was actually the subjective experience that did the healing, not just some neurochemical, you know, side effect, right? Mm-hmm. So there are companies that are exploring that and running clinical trials, and we're going to find out, I think, this year with some level of confidence whether they work.
I'm actually really excited to hear about that too. Like I haven't done nearly as much research into it as you, but like I knew that there were companies that are trying to basically make the psychedelic without the psychedelic experience. Yeah. And my initial opinion is fuck you, because because again, you know, for me personally, again, it's all of the subjective experiences to me was the thing that did it. But that being said, I really don't know. So there's
we don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing. So I do think it's really,
and also I think it's worth pointing out, like if a company is successful in developing a molecule like that and commercializing it, that's not going to like remove psychedelic mushrooms from planet Earth. You know, they're still going to exist, so that'll remain an option.
Yeah, 100%. But like, I mean, I'm curious again, just because I think you've done more research, and I don't expect you to know this, but is it essentially just trying to find a mechanism to just induce the neuroplasticity and just do that without having like the full trip that you have to go through?
Yeah, I think essentially, but you know, neuroplasticity is a pretty broad mm-hmm. category. You know, we're all neuroplastic at any given point, even into old age. So I think it's more about finding what the unique blend of different like chemical receptors are being activated and different pathways being enacted by certain compounds, and then producing analogs of those compounds that somehow, you know, do not induce the same subjective trippy experience. And, you know, there'll be like analogs for each of the different medicines because they all work slightly differently. Mm-hmm. I read a trip report from someone who had taken one of the analogs of ibogaine. They're calling that category tabernathologs, I think, so like based on the species name of the plant. And what he described was certainly I would call psychoactive, but not psychedelic. He said that it created the same effect that you get from, I think people have described this with mescaline. People have definitely described it with ibogaine, obviously. This idea of being able to focus with, like, it just quiets the mind so that focus becomes so easy, mm-hmm.
And
natural and, like, pleasant. But nothing is altered about what you're focusing on.
Yeah. I think the term psychedelic is at this point become like this blanket term that has lost a lot of meaning. Because when I see people talking about, again, like MDMA is psychedelic, ketamine is as a psychedelic, like I don't consider those psychedelics, but like I still get it, and they still need to be in the conversation.
That's almost like a political thematic categorization.
Yeah, I definitely think
versus a chemical one.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas like if someone were to ask me 5 years ago, name a psychedelic drug, I would be able to pretty confidently be like, oh, LSD, mushrooms, and DMT.
Yeah,
just because those are the ones that
the so-called classic.
Yeah, exactly. Like the
tryptamines.
The classical psychedelic tryptamines. Those ones. Any other like thing? I mean, I'm excited for just the fact that it's 2024 and the fact that we're in an election cycle. I know that there are a lot of states that have psychedelic initiatives on their ballots, so I'm really curious to see which ones are going to pass.
It's wild how much, like, that I'm not like a super expert in politics or like the political process or anything, but writing Tricycle Day, I've become a little bit more aware of how things work. And, there have been multiple states already that have pre-filed bills for the 2024 season. They did it like at the end of 2023. And I think you're right. The election cycle has something to do with like catalyzing, accelerating some of this movement.
Yeah, it's going to be, it's definitely going to be exciting. Also too, so like, just to be clear, are you literally the only one that writes each Tricycle Day newsletter? Like, do you have anybody else that's doing that?
No, I do all of the writing.
That's crazy.
And I don't intend to outsource or delegate that at any point, because when I first started the newsletter, I thought like, hey, what's something that I can do that even if I lose from like the capitalist game perspective, I'll still win. And to me, learning about the psychedelic field that's rapidly emerging before our very eyes was a win. So I want to keep doing that because it taps me in.
Yeah. Do you have anything like you specifically are really excited for this year?
I mean, I think it's very exciting that, there's a high likelihood that MDMA assisted therapy is going to be approved by the FDA. Not just because MDMA therapy is like incredibly beneficial, has been shown to be so in global phase 3 clinical trials, but also because it kind of becomes the bellwether for the entire, and I'm using this term in the political way, psychedelic movement. If FDA approves this, then it kind of inspires confidence for other biotechs to continue pursuing. And there are already many who have drugs in pipeline, but in some cases they can only take it so far without a further capital injection. And I think that some of the big pharmaceutical companies that will buy those biotechs and finish the commercialization path need to see this in order to feel confident, putting in $30-40 million checks.
Yeah. I'm really curious to see how, assuming that does happen, hopefully this year, but at some point, I'm just curious to see like how insurance is going to work to be able to actually cover this, and like, who is it going to be accessible to? That's one of my biggest questions, is like, who is actually going to be able to get access to this?
It's going to be few people in the beginning. And that's how it always is. It starts with pretty high barriers to access and then gradually comes down over time, because the insurance companies will need to see that it is in fact cost effective, and they need long-term longitudinal data to prove that out and know that it's cost effective. But there are some companies that are doing interesting work in this space. I'm not sure if you've heard of Enthea. Do you know them?
No, I don't actually.
Okay, Enthea is a startup that's like a third-party health benefits administrator, and so they're working with, basically their customers are employers, and they allow employers to tag on psychedelic therapy as a benefit, just as they would like a dental plan.
Okay.
Yeah, and so they're already in operation, and they started with ketamine, but this year they're trying to add psilocybin in legal markets, and hopefully MDMA, if MDMA is approved.
Yeah. It's so like my biggest challenge I think that I have with all of this is like, if one of the biggest lessons that I've gotten from psychedelics has been showing me just how insanely ass backwards the world that we live in sort of is. And so I struggle with the fact that We're now trying to inject these medicines into the ass backwards world. What are the repercussions that that's going to then have on the system? Like if the system is designed to keep us essentially down, which it is to an extent, it's not designed so everybody is equal and gets lifted up and gets to live their best life. It just doesn't work like that. Like the people in power like do unfortunately want to stay in power from my perspective. So like that's why I'm really curious, because if all of a sudden we have these people that are now thinking on a much more like universal consciousness level, it's going to have to change. It's going to have to fundamentally change the way that we do things. It's going to have to fundamentally change the system, how it works.
Yeah. But I mean, does that make you feel pessimistic or optimistic?
It makes me feel really optimistic. I'm just more, I'm very optimistic about it, but I think that in order to essentially change the system that is this big, like there's going to be a period that's kind of chaotic that I think we need to be prepared for.
A period of upheaval.
Yeah, that we do need to just genuinely be prepared for, which excites me, but I think fucking terrifies most people.
Yeah, I think it does terrify a lot of people. I think that's probably the source of a lot of the fear that's perpetuating the stigma around psychedelics is like, look, these are things that make you break out of frames of thinking. And if you do that at mass scale, then maybe these systems that are built on, consensus agreement can fall apart.
Yeah. No, it's super exciting to me. Well, that's all I got for you at this point. So before we go, is there anything else that we haven't touched on? Anything that you want to promote?
There's tons that we haven't touched on.
Oh, well, yeah, but really, really quickly. Anything else?
Yeah. No, I mean, I enjoyed talking to you, and I think that your podcast is refreshing in the sense that it's just very raw and conversational and authentic. So I came in with no expectations of what we were going to talk about. I think you did the same, and hopefully you're happy with how it turned out. I had a good time.
I love it, man. No, I had a great time. I said my intention at the beginning was to have fun. I got a big smile on my face right now. I had a ton of fun, man.
Yeah, same here.
Well, thank you so much, Henry. Where can people find you?
TricycleDay.com. Also, Tricycle Day on Instagram.
Perfect. Everybody check it out. Seriously, this is genuinely like my favorite newsletter and way to get all of my psychedelic-related news, and also all of my psychedelic-related memes. They're fire. Henry, I love you. Thank you so much for coming on, brother.
Thank you so much. Love you too.
Thank you, everybody, for listening, and thanks again to Henry for coming on the podcast, sharing your wisdom with the people, and just being a dope human being. So I love and appreciate you, my brother. If you are not already following and subscribed and all that stuff to Trip Sitting, make sure that you are doing all that on Instagram. We are at tripsitting.blog. Give us a rating if you feel so called to do so. And if you just want to get in contact with me, shoot me a DM or send me an email, which is tripsittingblog@gmail.com. Thank you again, and we will see you for the next episode. Peace.